welcome to Stories. I'm Sherry. This week's story is The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Hans Christian Andersen was born in Denmark in 1805 and died in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1875. He wrote plays, novels, poems, autobiographies, and travel stories, but what he is most remembered for are his stories for children. Andersen was born into poverty and had dreams of becoming an actor. The first story he wrote was self-published and was an immediate success. His fairy tales are popular with adults and children because he writes about feelings that an adult can sympathize with while never forgetting the child's perspective. Often his stories have a sad or even tragic ending. This may have been because he felt like an outsider due to his humble origins. The Fir Tree is about a little tree who can't wait to grow up and live his life wherever that may take him. Instead of living for the day, he is always dreaming about what lies ahead. He is finally chopped down in order to be used as a Christmas tree. And now, without further ado, here is The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Out in the woods stood a nice little fir tree. The place he had was a very good one. The sun shone on him. As to fresh air, there was enough of that, and round him grew many large-sized comrades, pines as well as firs. But the little fir wanted so very much to be a grown-up tree. He didn't think of the warm sun and of the fresh air. He didn't care for the little cottage children that ran about and prattled when they were in the woods looking for wild strawberries. The children often came with a whole pitcher full of berries, or a long row of them threaded on a straw, and sat down near the young tree and said, "Oh, how pretty he is! What a nice little fir!" But this was what the tree could not bear to hear. At the end of a year he had shot up a good deal, and after another year he was another long bit taller, for with fir trees one can always tell by the shoots how many years old they are. "Oh, were I but such a high tree as the others are," he sighed, "then I should be able to spread out my branches, and with the tops to look into the whole wide world. Then would the birds build nests among my branches, and when there was a breeze, I could bend with as much stateliness as the others. Nor the birds, nor the red clouds, which morning and evening sailed above them, gave the little tree any pleasure. In winter, when the snow lay glittering on the ground, a hare would often come leaping along and jump right over the little tree. Oh, that made him so angry! But 2 winters were past, and in the third the tree was so large that the hare was obliged to go round it. "To grow and grow, to get older and be tall," thought the tree. "That, after all, is the most delightful thing in the world." In autumn, the woodcutters always came and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir tree, that had now grown to be a very comely size, trembled at the sight, for the magnificent great trees fell to the earth with noise and cracking. The branches were lopped off, and the trees looked long and bare. They were hardly to be recognized, and then they were laid in carts, and the horses dragged them out of the woods. Where did they go? What became of them? In spring, when the swallows and storks came, the tree asked them, "Don't you know where they have been taken? Have you not met them anywhere?" The swallows did not know anything about it, but the stork looked musing, nodded his head, and said, "Yes, I think I know. I met many ships as I was flying here from Egypt. On the ships were magnificent masts, and I venture to assert that it was they that smell so of fir. I may congratulate you, for they lifted themselves on high most majestically." "Oh, were I but old enough to fly across the sea, But how does the sea look in reality? What is it like?" "Now, that would take a long time to explain," said the stork, and with these words off he went. "Rejoice in thy growth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in thy vigorous growth and in the fresh life that moves within you." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears over him. But the fir didn't understand. When Christmas came, quite young trees were cut down, trees which often were not even as large or of the same age as this fir tree, who could never rest, but always wanted to be off. These young trees, and they were always the finest looking, retained their branches. They were laid on carts, and the horses drew them out of the wood. "Where are they going to?" asked the fir. "They're not taller than I. There was one indeed that was considerably shorter. And why do they retain all their branches? Where are they taken to?" We know," chirped the sparrows. "We've peeped in at the windows in the town below. We know where they're taken. The greatest splendor and the greatest magnificence one can imagine await them. We peeped through the windows and saw them planted in the middle of the warm room and ornamented with the most splendid things, with gilded apples, with gingerbread, with toys, and hundreds of lights." "And then?" asked the fir tree, trembling in every bough. "And then? What happens then?" "We didn't see anything more. It was incomparably beautiful." "I would like to know if I am destined for so glorious a career," cried the tree, rejoicing. "That's better than to cross the sea. What a longing I suffer. If only Christmas would come. I'm tall now, and my branches spread like the others that were carried off last year. Oh, I wish I was already on that cart, in the warm room, with all the splendor and magnificence. Yes, then something better, something still grander will surely follow. Something better, something still grander must follow. But what? Oh, how I long, how I suffer. I don't know myself. What's the matter with me?" "Rejoice in our presence," said the air and the sunlight. "Rejoice in thy own fresh youth." But the tree did not rejoice at all. He grew and was green both winter and summer. People that saw him said, "What a fine tree!" And towards Christmas, he was one of the first that was cut down. The axe struck deep into the very pith. The tree fell to the earth with a sigh. He felt a pang. It was like a swoon. He couldn't think of happiness, for he was sad at being separated from his home, from the place where he had sprung up. He knew well that he would never see his dear old comrades, the little bushes and flowers around him, any more. Perhaps not even the birds. The departure was not at all agreeable. The tree came to when he was unloaded in a courtyard with the other trees, and heard a man say, "Oh, that one is splendid. We don't want the others." Then 2 servants came in rich livery and carried the fir tree into a large and splendid drawing-room. Portraits were hanging on the walls, and near the white porcelain stove stood 2 large Chinese vases with lions on the covers. There, too, were large easy-chairs, silken sofas, large tables full of picture books and full of toys worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars. At least the children said so. And the fir tree was stuck upright in a cask that was filled with sand. But no one could see that it was a cask, for green cloth was hung all around it, and it stood on a large, gaily colored carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered! What was going to happen? The servants, as well as the young ladies, decorated it. On one branch there hung little nets cut out of colored paper, and each net was filled with sugar plums. and among the other boughs gilded apples and walnuts were suspended, looking as though they had grown there, and little blue and white tapers were placed among the leaves, dolls that looked for all the world like men. The tree had never beheld such before, were seen among the foliage, and at the very top a large star of gold tinsel was fixed. It was really splendid, beyond description splendid. "This evening," they all said, "how it will shine this evening." "Oh," thought the tree, "if only the evening would come, if the tapers were only lighted, and then I wonder what will happen. Perhaps the other trees from the forest will come to look at me. Perhaps the sparrows will beat against the window panes. I wonder if I shall take root here, and winter and summer stand covered with ornaments." He knew very much about the matter, but he was so impatient that for sheer longing he got a pain in his back. And this, with trees, is the same thing as a headache with us. The candles were now lighted. What brightness! What splendor! The tree trembled so in every bough that one of the tapers set fire to the foliage. It blazed up famously. "Help! Help!" cried the young ladies, and they quickly put out the fire. Now the tree did not even dare tremble. What a state he was in! He was so uneasy in case he should lose something of his splendor, that he was quite bewildered amidst the glare and brightness, when suddenly both folding doors opened, and a troop of children rushed in, as if they would upset the tree. The older persons followed quietly. The little ones stood quite still, but it was only for a moment. Then they shouted so that the whole place re-echoed with their rejoicing. They danced around the tree, and one present after the other was pulled off. "What are they doing?" thought the tree. "What's going to happen now?" And the lights burned down to the very branches, and as they burned down, they were put out, one after the other. And then the children had permission to plunder the tree. They fell upon it with such violence that all its branches cracked. If it had not been fixed firmly in the ground, it would certainly have tumbled down. The children danced about with their beautiful playthings. No one looked at the tree, except the old nurse, who peeped between the branches, but it was only to see if there was a fig or an apple left that had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, drawing a little fat man towards the tree. He seated himself under it and said, "Now we are in the shade, and the tree can listen too. But I shall tell only one story. Now which one will you have? The one about Ivedy-Avedy, or about Humpty Dumpty, who tumbled downstairs, and yet, after all, came to the throne and married the princess?" "Ivedy-Avedy!" cried some. "Humpty Dumpty!" cried the others. There was such a bawling and screaming. The fir tree alone was silent, and he thought to himself, "Am I not to bawl with the rest? Am I to do nothing whatever?" For he was one of the company, and had done what he had to do. And the man told about Humpty Dumpty that tumbled down, who, notwithstanding, came to the throne, and at last married the princess, and the children clapped their hands and cried, "Go on! Do go on!" They wanted to hear about Ivedy-Avedy too, but the little man only told them about Humpty Dumpty. The fir tree stood quite still and absorbed in thought. The birds in the wood had never told a story like this. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess? Yes, yes, that's the way of the world, thought the fir tree, and believed it all, because the man who told the story was so good-looking. Well, who knows? Maybe I may fall downstairs too, and get a princess as wife. And he looked forward with joy to tomorrow, where he hoped to be decked out again with lights, playthings, fruits, and tinsel. "I won't tremble tomorrow," thought the fir tree. "I will enjoy to the full all my splendor. Tomorrow I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty, and perhaps that of Ivedy-Avedy too." And the whole night the tree stood still and in deep thought. In the morning, the servant and the housemaid came in. "Now then, the splendor will begin again," thought the fir. But they dragged him out of the room and up the stairs into the loft, and here, in a dark corner where no daylight could enter, they left him. "What's the meaning of this?" thought the tree. "What am I doing here? What shall I hear now, I wonder?" And he leaned against the wall, lost in reverie. Time enough had he, too, for his reflections, for days and nights passed on, and nobody came up. And when at last somebody did come, it was only to put some great trunks in a corner, out of the way. There stood the tree, quite hidden. It seemed as if he had been entirely forgotten. "It's now winter outside," thought the tree. "The earth is hard and covered with snow. Men can't plant me now, and therefore I have been put up here under shelter till the springtime comes. How thoughtful that is! How kind people are, after all! If it only were not so dark here, and so terribly lonely. Not even a rabbit. And out in the woods it was so pleasant when the snow was on the ground, and the rabbit leaped by. Yes, even when he jumped over me. But I didn't like it then. It's really terribly lonely here." "Squeak, squeak," said a little mouse, at the same moment, peeping out of his hole, and then another little one, and then another little one came. They snuffed about the fir tree and rustled among the branches. "It's dreadfully cold," said the mouse. "But it would be delightful here, old fir, wouldn't it?" "I am by no means old," said the fir tree. "Where do you come from?" asked the mice. "And what can you do?" They were so extremely curious. "Tell us about the most beautiful spot on the earth. Have you ever been there? Were you never in the larder where cheeses lie on the shelves and hams hang from above, where one can dance on candles, that place where one enters lean and comes out again fat?" "I know no such place," said the tree. "But I know the woods, where the sun shines and where the little birds sing." And then he told all about his youth, and the little mice had never heard a story like that before, and they listened and said, "Well, how much you have seen! How happy you must have been!" "I," said the fir tree, thinking over what he had himself told. "Yes, in reality, those were happy times." And then he told about Christmas Eve, when he was decked out with cakes and candles. "Oh," said the little mice, "how fortunate you have been, old fir tree!" "I am by no means old," he said. "I came from the woods this winter. I am in my prime, and just a little short for my age." "What delightful stories you know," said the mice, and the next night they came with 4 other little mice, who were to hear what the tree recounted. And the more he told, the more he remembered himself, and it appeared as if those times had really been happy times. "But they may still come. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he got a princess." And he thought at that moment about a nice little birch tree growing out in the woods. To the fir, that would be a real charming princess. "Who is Humpty Dumpty?" asked the mice. So then the fir tree told the whole fairy tale, for he could remember every single word of it, and the little mice jumped for joy up to the very top of the tree. Next night 2 more mice came, and on Sunday 2 rats even. But they said the stories were not interesting, which vexed the little mice, and they too now began to think them not so very amusing either. "Do you only know one story?" asked the rats. "Only that one," answered the tree. "I heard it on my happiest evening, but I didn't know then how happy I was." "It's a very stupid story. Don't you know one about bacon and candles? Can't you tell any larder stories?" "No," said the tree. "Then goodbye," said the rats, and they went home. At last, the little mice stayed away also, and the tree sighed. After all, it was very pleasant when the sleek little mice sat around me and listened to what I told them. Now that too is over. But I will take good care to enjoy myself when I am brought out again. But when was that to be? One morning there came a quantity of people and set to work in the loft. The trunks were moved, the tree was pulled out and thrown, rather hard, it's true, down on the floor, but a man drew him towards the stairs, where the daylight shone. "Now my merry life will begin again," thought the tree. He felt the fresh air, the first sunbeam, and now he was out in the courtyard. All passed so quickly, there was so much going on around him, the tree quite forgot to look to himself. The court adjoined a garden, and all was in flower. The roses hung so fresh and odorous over the balustrade. The lindens were in blossom. The swallows flew by and said, "My husband is come." But it was not the fir tree that they meant. "Now then, I shall really enjoy life," said he exultingly, and spread out his branches. But, alas, they were all withered and yellow. It was in a corner that he lay, among weeds and nettles. The golden star of tinsel was still on the top of the tree, and glittered in the sunshine. In the courtyard, some of the children were playing who had danced at Christmas around the fir tree, and were so glad at the sight of him. One of the youngest ran and tore off the golden star. "Look what's still on the ugly old Christmas tree," said he, trampling on the branches, so that they all cracked beneath his feet. And the tree beheld all the beauty of the flowers and the freshness in the garden. He beheld himself, and wished he had remained in his dark corner in the loft. He thought of his first youth in the woods, of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened with so much pleasure to the story of Humpty Dumpty. "It's over. It's in the past," said the poor tree. "If I had only rejoiced when I had a reason to do so. But now, it's past. It's past." And the gardener's boy chopped the tree into small pieces. There was a whole heap lying there. The wood flamed up splendidly under the large brewing copper, and it sighed so deeply. Each sigh was like a shot. The boys played about in the court, and the youngest wore the golden star on his chest, which the tree had had on the happiest night of his life. However, that was over now. The tree gone, the story at an end. All was over. Every tale must end at last. Thank you for listening to The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. May you always find a good book to read, and may all your stories end well.